Erev Tov, everyone. In the recounting of the construction of the Mishkan, which is this week's Parsha Vayakel, it always says Vayas, V'osu. It doesn't say who made it. The exception to that is the Aron Kodesh. There the Torah says Vayas B'tzalel Esoron. So the Aron was made by B'tzalel. So Rashi wants to know why here the name is mentioned and it's not mentioned anywhere else. B'tzalel made everything else too. He supervised the construction of the entire Mishkan. So Rashi says, because when they came to the Aron, he was Moser Nefesh, meaning he went to the extreme of his abilities, the extreme of human effort to construct it correctly. So, what does that mean? That he was Moser Nefesh. And on the other Kalim, he was not Moser Nefesh. He didn't have the same intensity of planning and intent and skill that he had with the Aron. So that's a very obscure Rashi, really, very difficult. What he means, Shemosar Nafsho. So the Mefarshim discuss it, but they don't discuss it necessarily as being the Pshat and Rashi. But they discuss it in terms of the Aron. The Aron apparently has to have a personal connection. The other artifacts in the Mishkan are for Klal Yisrael. They're general. They apply to the entire nation. Now, the Aron HaKodesh was hidden. It was behind the curtain of the Kodesh Kadoshim. The Kruvim were on it. The Aron HaKodesh was personal, to the extent that everyone has to build his own Aron Kodesh. The relationship to Torah is purely personal. And it's not something that can be engendered in a general sense. So there are things that, in the Aron that represent the nation of Israel, the light of God, truth. Those are all generic terms, so to speak, that cover a lot of ground and are general to all of people. Many times, not even just to the Jews. Chesed, emes, even tefillah, that's not restricted to Jews. It's a human quality that's general. Chazal say, Moshe said, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, morosho kehilas Yaakov. So the Torah is the inheritance of Kilas Yaakov. So the Gemara says Morosho al tikra morosho elo moroso. Moroso means betrothed, married, restricted to, which is the relationship of marriage, that the husband and the wife are restricted to each other. So the Torah is also restricted to Klal Yisrael. We say that in Tehillim every day. Chukov u'mishpotov liYisrael lo asochein l'chol goy u'mishpotim bal yidon. Chazal say that there really is a halachic issue to teach Torah Shabbal Peh to non-Jews, because that, so to speak, breaks the barrier. I saw that there are two women that are professors of Talmud at Yale University. They both were non-Jewish. One of them still is. And she's Sie retten lernen, she says, over at Chaim Brisker's there. I heard her on YouTube, Christina Hayes. Undoubtedly a brilliant woman, but she still was a practicing Christian. The other woman was Megayer. After teaching for 8-10 years, the Talmud got to her. And she said that she saw the contradiction, the anomaly, and therefore she converted. And she's a Yoris said it. So the Torah is a personal matter. And we say that all the time. Everybody has a chelik. And my chelik is not yours. And we want to have our chelik in the Torah. And we can only have it by making the Torah personal to us. So therefore we find in all of Jewish history and Jewish scholarship that there were always different fields of study of Torah. And within those fields, there were specialties. Because that's what spoke to that person. That's what created, so to speak, the atmosphere that that person could function with in the confines of Torah. So Betzalel, they say, again, it's not the Pshat in Rashi, but the interpretation is there anyway. Mosar Nafsho, that's the nefesh of Rashi. That's the nefesh of Betzalel. He constructed everything in the Mishkan. But so to speak, none of the other items in the Mishkan spoke to him personally. Were the items that he had such a strong and intimate and personal relationship with. When he came to the Aron Kodesh, there he expressed himself. He felt himself present there. And therefore, that's why the Torah says, Vayas Betzalel es Aron. Because the Aron is Betzalel. Whereas the rest of the Mishkan is more general, less personal. And it's been that way throughout the experience of the Jewish people over all of the ages. there are people that study certain Masechtas. There are people that study Mishnah. There are people that study Tanakh. There are people that study what speaks to them. And the Torah is never one size fits all. And that's why it has its length and breadth and depth, because it has to speak to millions and millions and millions of people, each one on that person's own level and own emotions. Part of the problem that we have in our time, we have lots of problems. But part of the problem is that we have educational systems that are pretty much one size fits all. And therefore, there are many times when the curriculum and the studies and the teacher doesn't speak to the student, doesn't feel any connection, and doesn't have any way to express himself in Torah. And that leads to problems. It's interesting, in the Torah, we do not find the concept of schools. We find the concept of home learning, parental teaching, but we don't find the concept of organized schools. Because organized schools, it's very hard to have any personal relationship. And if you have students, as there always exist students that, so to speak, are different, that have different interests and needs, so then you're not going to speak to them, so then their Torah is lost. And that is a very, very difficult situation to overcome. So in this posuk of Ayas B'Tzalel Es Aaron, there's a deep lesson here regarding education and regarding one's own relationship with Torah and with learning. That one has to see oneself in it. It's not just a question of knowledge and how many pages you covered, but it's a question of how much is involved with you. Famous quip of the attributed to many is that the person came to the Rebbe and he said, I just went through half Shas. And the Rebbe said to him, how much of Shas went through you? That's a different issue completely. So to the extent that we can, we should at least recognize that issue and attempt to build on it and attempt to create that each and every one would be able to say, Bayas so-and-so, that's Aaron, that the Aaron speaks to us personally. Rabbi Chananya ben Akashi, Omer Ratzak Gadish Baruch Hu, Zakum Yisrael, Ufichal Chibur Lahem Torah Mitzvos, and Amar, Adonai Chafetz Aman Sitzori Yagdim, Torah Yagdim.